Hello and welcome to this round 4 of the World Championship here in Las Vegas, Nevada. We've already had our Dominaria draft for the day and now we get a chance to jump into Standard. Simon Gertson, you're a Pro Tour winner. You understand as well as any of us just how important it is as we move into Constructed that these players transition well, because while you can certainly do fantastically well at this tournament by being excellent at Limited, you can never win the title if you're not good at Constructed. We're going to get a chance to head down to our feature match area and see our first matchup, and it's kind of an interesting one that we got going here. We have Ken Yukuhiro. He is the player that of anyone in the field was going to be the hardest to predict what he's going to be on. From Japan, the one lone Japanese player in the field, and he is up against a former world champion in Braun-Duin. Both of these players, they got out of the draft on a 2-1 record, so a solid enough start, but they will be really looking to keep the pace going as they get into these constructed rounds. There we can see these players, they have already got their hands up and ready to go, and the list that Ken Yukuhiro's on, one of the most interesting lists that we see in the entire room here, Simon.
Absolutely, we are looking at mono blue aggro.
Now, mono blue aggro, for those of you unfamiliar, and I wouldn't give you any sort of trouble for being unfamiliar, is a little bit unusual. In principle, it can have some very aggressive starts with the likes of Slitherblade, Siren Stormtamer, and so on. But the thing that it's really got going for it is it's got lots of disruption as well. You can see in that hand there for Yukuhiro, he's got Essence Scatters to counter creatures. He's got Wizard's Retort to counter just about anything. And then he can get consistent damage through, even in the face of blockers, with either Flyers or this Slitherblade that we see. Sat in hand, at least for now, for Yukuhiro.
So, in fact, he's on a control draw there with 3 permission spells and a lonely 1/1 unblockable.
Yeah, this Slitherblade, we saw it be part of a draft strategy around the time of Amonkhet. This really its first foray into Constructed, getting exiled by Magma Spray, and unfortunately for Ken, the creature coming initially from Braun-Duin in the form of that Scrap Heap Scrounger, kind of perfect against what he was going with the counter magic there.
Yeah, and even if you manage to counter a bunch of the threats from Black-Red, there's always more to come. And also, what do you want to counter? If you counter the creatures with your Essence Scatters, suddenly there's Chandras to be worried about, the removal spell taking out your few creatures that you've drawn. I really don't like this starting hand by Ken Yukuhiro.
Yeah, obviously, it always can feel kind of rough going down to 6, maybe even 5 cards. But in this case, it was what Ken Yukuhiro kept with. And if he'd found himself up against a draw that even just had different creatures here, he might have been in good shape. But because that Scrap Heap Scrounger can come back at such little cost, Braun-Duin off to a fantastic fantastic start here as he gets down a Heart of Kiran. Yeah,
interesting point, actually. BBD, I interviewed him on his draft, and he said, I played a lot of Standard in the Magic Online queues, and I got to play a lot against Slitherblade. I don't know if that's going to be helpful for Worlds, but here you see it. He actually is facing the deck with 21 islands.
And those 21 islands, very important for one of the cards that we've highlighted, even in the name of this deck. Tempest Djinn has power equal to the number of islands you have in play, so it will always be huge. Wizard's Retort, they're dealing with Chandra, Torch of Defiance, but Braun-Duin, he's still got gas in the tank. He can keep on going here. He gets to crew that Heart of Kiran, attack for still more damage. Ken Yukuhiro, he's on just 10 life, and so far hasn't really presented very much in the way of defense against what's going on.
No, you can't play this reactive game against Black-Red, not if you're an aggro deck of your own.
Now, I must think that if Ken Yukuhiro has elected to play this blue deck, that he feels like it does have good game against the red list. It may just be that the way these exact draws have lined up has been unfortunate. Essence Scatter now doing good work against Glorybringer, but in spite of this, it's Braun-Duin that has the clock on the board. He's getting stuck in for 4 damage a turn with that Heart of Kiran, and right now, Yukuhiro, he might have been okay against all of the red cards, but these artifacts very much hurting him.
This is the first big play of Yukuhiro with that Tempest Djinn hitting the battlefield.
Tempest Djinn right now a 7/4 flyer for 3 mana. Incredible rate on this Djinn from Dominaria here. We saw a little bit of Tempest Djinn in the draft stages. Owen Turtenwald had one in his red-blue deck that he was able to get to 2-1 with. Braun-Duin here. This really the first big target for removal. Cut to Ribbons was the play, but a dive down there from Ken Yukuhiro, meaning that not only does he get to counter that spell on Resolution, he also now has a creature with high enough toughness that it can quite happily block and it's not even a trade anymore. It will just survive what's going on the other side of things. And Essence Scatter on Glorybringer. All right, Yukuhiro, he's been able to do something to at least hold back the onslaught coming from the other side of the table.
Still an uphill battle, but this turn was the first one where his answers really lined up well against what BBD was trying to do.
Yeah, dive down a card that was a staple in Ixalan draft, and indeed many of the cards in Ken Yukuhiro's deck. If anything, we've seen more in 40-card formats, but they have gradually found themselves creating critical mass of blue cards such that he's able to get something going here.
For those that are seeing this deck, the mono-blue deck, for the first time, one of the key cards is actually Curious Obsession. So what you want to do is you want to play a tempo game with an early creature, Curious Obsession, and then all those reactive cards and protection spells are actually great.
Yeah, Curious Obsession giving you a way of attacking through and then just drawing the additional cards that you need each and every turn to make sure that playing a card like Dive Down, which doesn't really advance your game plan, also doesn't hold it back too much. Rekindling Phoenix, meeting still more counter magic from Yukuhiro. Just one card left here for Braun-Duin, but he's still getting these attacks in, and finally we see a trade between Tempest, Djinn and that Heart of Kiran. Only islands in hand, though, for Ken Yukuhiro. He just has to scoop up his cards as Braun-Duin takes a relatively straightforward game one. These players going to have to go to their sideboards now to see if they can change things up. I have to imagine that at least from Ken Yukuhiro's side of things, he's got a fairly clear plan for what he wants to do against the likes of the Red Menace.
Yeah, this is definitely a matchup that Ken has been preparing for, but honestly, if I look at his sideboard, I don't see anything that's specifically targeted at Black-Red. He just needs a better start this time, I think.
All right, a better start is what he'll be working toward. We will have that better start for you after these messages, but for now, a quick break.
Looking for a place to hang out and play Magic? Head to your local game store this and every Friday to play Friday Night Magic events. Get more info at magic.wizards.com/FNM.
Hello and welcome back to this round 4 of the World Championship, our very first round of Standard, and this the moment in the tournament where the players first get a chance to find out, after all of that preparation, all of that hard work on this relatively well-explored, constructed format, exactly what the players have brought along. We've already seen game 1 for Ken Yukuhiro with his blue Tempest Djinn deck, really not quite firing on all cylinders for him against the red-black aggro of Braun-Duin. But now, after sideboarding, these players will have had an opportunity to adjust their deck just a little bit, and we'll get a chance to potentially find out what it is about this blue list that has Ken Yukuhiro quite so excited. Yukuhiro there, one of the players known on the Pro Tour for having a real inventive streak and quite a wide range in terms of the decks that he can play. He was the guy that was playing hardened scales in Standard. He's the guy that has been playing all sorts of interesting lists in Modern, including Hollow One, which got him a Pro Tour top 8 and ultimately helped him get to this World Championship. For Ken Yukuhiro, he's just looking for a deck that has power, and he seems to really embrace this notion of going a little bit rogue.
Yeah, he's definitely a rogue player. Doesn't really want to go with the mainstream because he thinks that these kind of off-the-beaten-path strategies give him the best chance at victory.
And at the same time, I think he has a lot of fun with them as well. He is always one of those players with a smile on his face while he's playing. He just really enjoys the game of Magic the Gathering, even when it's being played at these very high stakes.
You will see even more of what we saw in game 1, which is a lot of creatures by Ken Yukuhiro being answered by BBD's removal spells, because basically once the first threat sticks and Ken Yukuhiro is ahead on board, then his deck operates at maximum level.
Yeah, we see cut to ribbons there, dealing with Tempest Djinn right after Merfolk Trickster has been dealt with a Magma Spray. 1-for-1 removal from Braun-Duin, but he then has the kind of threats that can potentially come back. Baralchi's Compliance and a Slitherblade now coming for Yukuhiro. This is his aggro draw.
Yeah, a big tempo play also, putting 2 creatures on the battlefield. That Baral makes all of his counter magic better. And look at Brian's mana base. It's not perfect right here.
Oh, okay.
So PNLR, also kind of a tempo play. You get 2 creatures in play for just the 1 spell there. Slitherblade will not mind how many creatures on the other side of the battlefield, simply cannot be blocked. And a second Slitherblade. This is Ken Yukuhiro finally in this game getting in for some damage.
Yeah, this is now a Curious Obsession, making that play that Ken was looking for in game 1. A creature, unblockable, that is generating continuous advantage. And once you're working with 2 cards a turn, then this mono-blue deck can actually fight a fair fight against black-red.
Now, Yukuhiro there was looking on at a Charter Course in hand and deciding whether or not he wants to go with it. Ultimately, he's kept his mana up, which suggests that we might see some counter magic, but the perfect way of stripping that out from Duress from Brian.
He actually has a Wizard's Retort, which is activated by Baral, and will actually mean that he gets to draw and discard if he decides to fire it off here.
Does go with Wizard's Retort. 2 mana counter spell. Even gets to do a little loot, we call it, drawing and discarding there as he stops the Duress. Does mean that the shield's now down, though, for Ken Yukuhiro, if there was anything further from Brian.
Yeah. The best thing for Brian, I think, would be to be able to kill that Slitherblade, abrading it, because now it has 3 toughness. Magma Spray is not enough anymore. But you definitely don't want to give Ken another untap step, and then suddenly you're facing maybe another Curious Obsession, all these problematic cards that Ken is drawing.
Baral, Chief of Compliance, doing a little bit of work now, and even getting into the red zone with the help of Curious Obsession. A lot of toughness on Baral, so a little bit harder to remove with most of the 1 mana removal available to this red-black aggro list. PNLR there, respecting the amount of card drawing that Ken Yukuhiro representing, just jumping in the way of Baral in a bit of a legend fight. It's
an interesting block because it also represents Magma Spray in some extent, but because it's also this legendary that's blocking, if BBD is holding another PNLR, as he is, you can see it there, it's actually quite a good play to free up that card from your hand.
Let's actually have a little look at what's going on with Braun-Duin's hand. He has a copy of the Eldest Reborn in hand. That a great source of all sorts of card advantage as it gradually strips cards from hand, creatures from the battlefield, and ultimately gets back a creature in some fashion as well.
Yeah, of course, it's a sideboard card, and sometimes Yukuhiro will have a creature in play that he doesn't mind sacrificing. In other spots like this one, he's working with a single creature that he's trying to protect. And then if the Eldest Reborn resolves, Braun-Duin would be in great shape.
Yeah, right now Yukuhiro kind of on a protect the queen strategy. He's got one very powerful creature on the battlefield. If his counter magic can make sure that remains true, then he may find himself in good shape here.
Mm-hmm. And this is a play which I really like by BBD. He's not exposing his 5-mana Saga to counter magic, but instead he's running out PNLR saying, your Baral doesn't even have evasion, and if I resolve PNLR, I can even double block your Baral. So he's kind of checking out what kind of counter magic Ken has available. Ken smartly uses the Essence Scatter so that he has Wizard's Retort for a Chandra or the Eldest Reborn.
Shard, of course, very efficient indeed when you get to cast it for just a single point of mana. Everything really feeling a lot more powerful from Yukuhiro's list when he has this Baral Chief of Compliance in play. Of course, because it is legendary, it's not one that you're automatically going to be running the full 4 of. In this case, just a couple of copies in the deck, but especially with the Curious Obsession in play, it's seeming pretty good, and there is a response here to this Eldest Reborn.
Yeah, you see a nice little play there. Opting, putting a card on the bottom, drawing an island, and then casting Wizard's Retort. So you are, in a sense, you're suggesting that you didn't have a counter before opting, which of course wasn't the case. But the main reason for Ken doing that was he wanted to have more information about the loot trigger from Baral resolving.
Now, it must be noted that this Baral Chief of Compliance, it's not hurting Braun-Duin's life total to any massive degree here. This is a game of inches, and Yukuhiro, where he's getting the value really is all of these additional cards in hand and the fact that all of his spells much, much cheaper here. Rekindling Phoenix finally resolving, Braun-Duin able to get a creature in play, and potentially kind of a problematic one at that.
That's the perfect blocker for Baral. Ken has been flooding out despite all the extra cards and the Chart the Course and the looting. He's stuck there with a few islands, and now the problem is if he doesn't attack with Baral, he has to sacrifice Curious Obsession.
19, you 16? Yes.
Braun-Duin just living off the top of his deck now, though worth noting that Cut to Ribbons is in his graveyard. At the moment, he only has one source of black mana, but at some point that could change, and it is a very powerful way of finishing the game if you so choose.
This was a big swing turn. Curious Obsession going to the graveyard. Chandra resolving most likely. Oh no, Spell Pierce.
Yeah, this Spell Pierce, there are lots of stages in the game that it would be excellent. Right now, though, it just kind of mocking Yukuhiro here. He's got the dive down to keep his legend around in spite of that Chandra taking aim at Baral.
You can see how much respect BBD has for every single creature in Ken Yukuhiro's deck. BBD knows that if Ken doesn't have a creature in play, then his most scary cards, the Curious Obsessions, and those dive downs are not doing anything.
Each and every turn, Braun-Duin hoping to be able to keep that Planeswalker around, because here we see the plus ability, meaning that Heart of Kiran on the top of the deck, able to get cast. This is how Braun-Duin comes back from not having any cards available in hand. That plus the Kari Zev Skyship Raider coming into play means that Braun-Duin's board suddenly looking pretty fantastic, and Yukuhiro, all of those islands not working out so well for him.
Yeah, he's taking a gamble, bringing Mono Blue to this tournament. He knew that he would be facing a lot of black-red decks, and if the games go like we saw here, that's not a good sign for him.
Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to the amount of lands that Yukuhiro has in play. His list, likely in the entire tournament, has the fewest lands of just about any that anyone's playing. Just 21 lands to work with, and in other circumstances, he would reasonably expect to just sort of have a land-like draw and have it just work out. As things stand here, he's been doing all this looting, but just looting into more lands all over the place. Essence Scatter there on Goblin Chainwhirler, seeing still more lands on the top of Yukuhiro's deck.
Nice aggressive line here by BBD, who knows that the loyalty on his Chandra is not all that relevant, so crewing Heart of Kirin with it, really good play.
And Slitherbait the pickup. That wasn't going to help at that stage in the game. Braun-Duin picking up a relatively straightforward win, it must be said there, as we transition into the constructed stages of at least this day one of the World Championship. We will have similar sort of structure on day two, more drafts, more constructed, before we finally cut to our final 4 players on Sunday, which will all be standard. So standard, a very, very important piece of the puzzle for every player that is preparing in this event.
Almost like a Pro Tour, actually, where you have draft and constructed format, and then the top 8 at the Pro Tour. Here, the top 4 also played in the constructed format.
We're going to get a chance to jump across to one of our other matches there. We can see that we have Matt Severa and Matt Nass. It is the battle of the mats to see who will prevail. And in terms of caliber of players to jump into and see what they're doing in constructed, you do well. You do have a difficult time finding anyone better. Severa, the constructed master, and Matt Nass, well, he's one of the most innovative deck builders that we see at the Pro Tour level. He's been involved with a lot of great decks in the format, and this weekend he is on a deck that we're referring to as Turbo Fog. Now, Turbo Fog, it's had a long and storied history in Magic in various different forms. It's a deck that wants to completely shut down the attack step as much as possible, but it's picked up some very potent tools specifically in these last couple of sets, Simon.
Yes, absolutely. Turbo Fog is a very real deck, and that's mostly because you get to play Teferi and you protect it with Haze of Pollen and Root Snare. This deck is actually super consistent in that you will go off with a Nexus of Fate and a Teferian play if given enough time. And especially red-black aggro needs very specific cards to beat you. One of these cards is Insult to Injury.
Insult to Injury, of course, meaning that damage can't be prevented. Effectively, bizarrely, in a red-black deck, you've got something that functions almost as a counter to the key strategy of the Turbo Fog list. At this stage, these decks relatively well-known quantities in the format. Where we've last seen Turbo Fog at a kind of Pro Tour level, it was very, very new. How much has the run of play in this matchup changed now that this is a known quantity?
So the interesting thing is here we are talking about this world's metagame, almost a little bit an inbred metagame of only 24 players. And Matt Nass choosing to play Turbo Fog is actually kind of brilliant because you don't expect Turbo Fog to be a substantial part of the metagame. You think maybe 1 or 2 players are going to bring it. So reserving sideboard slots for Insult to Injury actually doesn't make a lot of sense from a game theoretical point of view. So I expect Matt Nass to have a better matchup against red-black this tournament than, for example, at a GP, where the red-black decks would bring Insult to Injury.
Yeah, I suppose that at a GP where there could be 1,000, 2,000 players, you have to respect a lot of different options. Here it's just a matter of correctly getting a bead on what your opponents are playing. Right now, Matt Severa kicking things off with a Bomat Courier on the very first turn. It exiles a card off the top, and potentially in the future, Matt Severa will be able to draw potentially quite a few cards off that Courier if it is able to attack unimpeded, and Matt Nass might well not be able to stop it attacking anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a scary card to play against, but the cards you're really scared about most are cards that can damage you unconditionally. So Chandra, Charge of Defiance on turn 4 is actually one of the most scary cards. And then Hazard the Fervent also has the ability to burn you out despite your fog effects.
So Hinterland Harbour on the second turn there for Nass. He's just making sure that his mana is all set up because this is the list that's sort of leaning on more colours than pretty much any other in the room.
A little bit of a misstep there. He thought that his second land would come into play untapped. We don't know if that's relevant, but there was definitely a bit of confusion. And I do like that Matt Nass is playing for Search for Ascanta. I think that card is just absolutely critical in the deck. You want as many effects that do something during your turn so that your Nexus of Fates get all the better.
Yeah, Search for Azcanta, a card that really broke out at the last World Championship. It was the card that elevated blue control decks in that metagame. Ultimately, it wasn't the straightforward control list that won last year, but you know what? Search for Azcanta has shown its potency time and time again in this standard format, even transitioning into modern, where it has been a key piece in one of the best decks in that format.
Yep. Also note the Dissenter's Deliverance. It was cycled here because Matt Nass didn't see one of the scary artifacts, the hard-hitting Heart of Kirin, or the well, no, I meant the Sorcerer's Spyglass that a lot of decks are playing in the sideboard to stop Teferi. So he instead cycled it to get further into his deck.
That's 4 total, so not 14.
So attacks coming in here from Matt Severa, and on the face of things, it would be easy to look at this game and think that, well, the Turbo Fog deck, it's just been taking a bunch of hits here and not really achieving a whole lot. But in some respects, the Turbo Fog deck, it just wants to weather these early turns and be alive.
Yes, and it wants to make his land drops. So Matt Nass is looking at a hand that has a Glimmer of Genius and Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. That means if he can hit an untapped 4th land, he's in great shape. He's never taking lethal next turn. We're looking at 7 points of damage, and that means if he has an untapped 4th land, he's in great shape. If he doesn't, it's going to become a lot more difficult.
We can also see Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, in play. This Planeswalker, arguably one of the most important cards that we're going to see, both in this standard format, but also standard once it rotates with Guilds of Ravnica. Incredibly potent control option.
Yeah, and you can see here why this decision was so difficult for Matt Nass. He took a long time on that Search for Azcanta trigger. It was an irrigated farmland, so the land he was looking for, but not an untapped one to cast Glimmer of Genius.
So yeah, this turn it will be a relatively sizable hit coming through. Doomfall coming from Matt Severa, meaning that potentially if it resolves, he gets to strip a card out of Nass's hand. So in response, Nass making sure that he's going to be protected from the attacks that are incoming, and he's got a Nexus of Fate, he's got Teferi, he's got Glimmer of Genius, he's got a lot going on in that hand.
Absolutely, and I expect that Teferi to enter Exile Zone very quickly. Now, you might be wondering why did Nass fog here already, because he is playing for a game where he needs to have 1 turn off to cast that Glimmer of Genius, and this means if he doesn't fog this turn, then he will never have this opening again.
Nexus of Fate there, one of the key elements of this deck. This is kind of the inevitability of the deck. Once it gets to a point where Search for Azcanta has transformed into Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, once you have Teferi in play, it becomes very straightforward indeed to take a lot of turns in a row. This is not a deck that's necessarily looking to go infinite, but it does like taking a lot of turns.
It's effectively infinite. Once you have cast a few Nexus of Fate in a row, you are almost guaranteed to find all of them because of Azcanta, Teferi, Karn, even Search for Azcanta. You can have an Azcanta and a Search for Azcanta. So you just dig through your deck and it gets smaller and smaller, but 4 Nexus of Fate in it.
Heart of Kirin here coming down for Matt Severa, who's attempting to pressure Nass's life total as much as he can here.
And Severa has been doing a great job of pressuring and had this one crucial disruption spell in Doomfall.
And I suppose that was a great bit of timing for Doomfall as well, because it was just before Nass might have been able to resolve a key Planeswalker.
Yeah. And now Nass needs to find, I believe, a Teferi and a Fog.
Yeah, a lot to ask from the draw step here for Matt Nass.
It's incredibly difficult for this deck to go off without a Teferi in play. And at the same time, incredibly easy for this deck to go off with a Teferi in play. Nexus of Fate is an instant, so you can actually cast it in your own end of turn after Teferi has generated 2 extra mana. This is the reason this deck exists.
As things stand, Matt Nass on 6 life. he finds himself kind of in check here. He can see that if he does nothing, he will lose the game this very next turn, and it's just a matter of what he can do to stave that off. Glimmer of Genius lets him dig a little deeper. Scries 2, they both go to the bottom, draws 2 new cards. The energy generated, not too big a deal in this matchup. As things stand, though, that was Severa picking up a win there.
Super lackluster draw by the Turbofog deck. I've played this deck a lot myself, and this was definitely a sub-board draw.
All right, well, we're going to get a chance to jump across and see another one of our matches here. Owen Turtenwald very nearly able to achieve that perfect 3-0 that he would have loved to kick things off with in Dominaria Draft. Dominaria, his favorite draft format, up against Wyatt Darby, one of the Pro Tour winners from this season. And, well, we've got an interesting matchup here in terms of the different decks that are being brought along. While we have Darby, let's have a look in terms of what he's going on. He's on... looks like he's actually on red-black here with that Heart of Kieran early on. On the other side of things, Owen Turtenwald, he's playing Godfarer's Gift.
Oh, interesting. That's not your standard choice that you would have expected from Owen, because he has been championing the black-red deck for a very long time.
And this is potentially a very interesting move by Turtenwald. I know that he's been preparing fiercely for this tournament, making sure that he gives himself every opportunity to advance and get the trophy here. It's something that he's really dearly looking for. And making an unusual choice could potentially throw off a lot of players in this metagame in terms of what they were preparing for.
Yeah. And that is, I think, the key thing that players were aiming towards. How do I out-meta game these other great competitors? Where do I get my edge? And how can I exploit, for example, the knowledge that there will be a lot of red-black aggro? Do I trust myself enough to win those mirror matches? Or do I maybe have a strategy that will give me a better win percentage? And also, don't forget, Tim, maybe that's not intuitive in the beginning, but we are playing tournaments with a very top-heavy price payout. So ultimately, taking a bit of a gamble with your metagame choice is likely to pay off from an expected value perspective.
So Champion of Wits here, allowing a draw and discard for Owen Turtenwald. He's already got Refurbish in play. Thopter Rest has dealt with the first Heart of Kieran, still looking for something to deal with the second one here. With Refurbish in his list, in principle, he can get the big, expensive Godfarer's Gift in play at the discount rate of just 4 mana.
Go.
As things stand, though, he's kicking things off with just making sure that that graveyard well stocked, so if Godfarer's Gift comes into play, he can really make the most of it.
Yeah, and even if he doesn't have the combo, he's under no pressure whatsoever. Darby is actually missing land drops, doesn't even have a way to animate that Heart of Kieran. So Owen doesn't even have to go a full-out combo and just expose it to an Abrade. He can just eternalize those Sunscorched Champions, in fact.
Eternalize. Gain 4 life.
Here we see it. Baffling End being the card discarded there to eternalize this Sunscourge champion. So a 4-4 coming into play, gaining a bit of life for Turtenwald. This is a post-sideboard game. I would imagine those Sunscourge champions not in the main deck, though if you're already willing to make the slightly off-the-wall choice, maybe coming pre-boarded against one of the decks that you think is going to be a big problem could get you a bit of an advantage.
Yep. And you are playing a Godfarer's Gift deck that wants to have creatures and that wants to aggressively mill itself. So there are definitely worse cards than Sunscorched Champion, which just generates value from being in the graveyard.
Yeah, this game 3, Owen Turtenwald looking in good shape. The 5 next to his name indicating he's the 5th ranked player in the world right now. Not quite in the running for the Player of the Year race. I know that his teammate Reed Duke came very, very close, even electing to travel all the way to Sweden last weekend in order to potentially chase that dream. Had a little bit of a rough start though in the draft though. As things stand, it's Owen on Team Peach Garden Oath who's really doing good work thus far in this tournament. Another Eternalize here on Sunscourge Champion. This is Owen Turtenwald trying to put things away before Wyatt Darby can draw out of the situation he finds himself in.
Yeah, and he's actually putting on a clinic here that you are just not forced to do anything when your opponent is stumbling. You just want to now increase the pressure so that if Wyatt Darby ever draws out of his mana troubles, you can still enact your main game plan, which is dig for a Godfarer's Gift, hardcast it, maybe refurbish it. But getting those Sunscorch champions, the 4/4 versions, onto the battlefield, absolutely the right thing to try to close out the game quickly.
So Darby there, he had the choice between a copy of Charter Course, Strategic Planning, and Refurbish. All of those cards, kind of ancillary card drawing spells compared to the beatdown that's being applied by these Sunscourge champions that have been eternalized. Finally, we see Strategic Planning, which could, in principle, given the mana available to Turtenwald here, set up a big Refurbish if needed.
Yeah, Turtenwald actually hasn't been successful at finding a Godfarer's Gift with his milling.
And we see a pre-combat Charter Course there because for Turtenwald, discarding a card, not necessarily a cost, more of a benefit potentially.
Strategic planning.
Strategic Planning, originally printed in Portal 3 Kingdoms, but what it always lets you do is look at 3 cards on the top of your deck. You get to put 1 in your hand, the other 2 in the graveyard, and in some respects, it's the putting cards in the graveyard that gives this one the nudge over other card drawing spells. Cut to ribbons again. White Derby, he's got some things to do with his mana, but this is going to be a tough rearguard action for him as attacks keep coming in here. Derby on just 2 life, and there's another Eternalize here, in this case, Champion of Wits. So another 4/4 in play, and we have Turtenwald digging still further through his deck.
Yeah, and that's the nail in the coffin. Now Turtenwald can actually threaten Godfarer's Gift from the graveyard, and Derby is dead on board as well.
Yeah, so many different ways that Owen Turtenwald can close this game out. Ultimately, he's not had to do any of the kind of key signature Godfarer's Gift action in that game 3, but you know what? Sometimes you can be the beatdown even if you're not the classic deck with aggro in its title. There you see Turtenwald. He is all business this tournament. He has looked very, very sharp when he was playing in the Limited and just laser focused on what he needs to do here this weekend in order to potentially pick up that World Championship trophy that I know he would be ecstatic to hold.
Yep. And he has been fortunate enough to compete in many World Championships, but he also knows that his results there haven't been tremendous, so he wants more.
Yeah, he had a heartbreaker in terms of losing to Seth Manfield in the finals of a World Championship, and I know that that proved to be a very focusing influence on his preparation for future events. He's really looking to try and have good finishes in this event, as he is in all events, but I think that more than many people in the field, for someone like Owen Turtenwald, this is kind of the pinnacle that he really wants to achieve.
Absolutely. And also with him being in the team series, he's fighting for even more money and glory. He has 2 of his teammates and best friends here with him. I think all of these things combined make him this fierce competitor.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how he plays things out. He's got a great support network with him, but ultimately it all comes down to his plays, his choices, and so far those choices working out all right for him. We are complete now in round 4, but do not go anywhere. We will have more information from the news desk for you right now.